introductions and housekeeping. So we have in person, we also have some online virtual joiners. So my name is Brooke. I work at the Cochrane Polar Bear Habitat, and today with us we have Dr. Brooke Biddlecombe, who's doing some work with Polar Bears International in Churchill. So she's going to talk a little bit on that. For those of you who are joining online, I just wanted to let you know we are going to be recording the session. The people here in person won't have to worry about that. But just so that anyone who couldn't be here at this time is able to watch the videos back later. Just give me one moment to get that going. Alrighty, and Brooke, I will let you take the floor.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to virtually be with you today. And if you're trying to figure out what's going on with my background, yes, this is a bunk bed. I am at Polar Bears International's Churchill field station right now. So I'm broadcasting live from the streets of Churchill. Sorry that you couldn't have a more picturesque background. It's very windy today, so that would have sounded very bad. But I will jump into my presentation. I'll share my screen. Can we see my slides? It might take a second.
Here we go.
All right. Okay, let's get into it. So today I have the pleasure on this International Arctic Sea Ice Day to talk to you guys a little bit about polar bears, well, a lot about polar bears, and a little bit about polar bear tourism. So a very quick intro. I am a research fellow at the University of Alberta, which is in Edmonton, and I am also a research fellow in collaboration with Polar Bears International, which is why I'm speaking with you today. I was formerly a biologist, polar bear biologist with Environment and Climate Change Canada, and also an aquatic biologist with Fisheries and Oceans, where I worked on beluga whales, narwhals, and bowhead whales. So generally speaking, I am interested in Arctic marine mammals. So the outline for today's talk, I'll give you guys a bit of an intro to the Arctic. We'll talk a little bit about polar bears, then the effects of climate change on polar bears, and then we'll finish up talking about polar bear tourism research, which is a research project that I am currently working on, and the reason why I am in Churchill right now. So first, an intro to the Arctic. This picture is during April in Hudson Bay, when there's quite a bit of sea ice in Hudson Bay, but you can see this open water in the middle here. That's what we call a lead, or a big old crack in the ice in scientific terms. But the Arctic can be defined in a lot of different ways, but it kind of gets summed up to more or less the same thing. So it is, of course, generally speaking, the northern polar region. There's the Arctic Circle, which we sometimes use to define the Arctic, which is approximately 66 degrees north, the latitude line. And the Arctic Circle is just the point in which there is at least one day of 24-hour daylight and 24-hour darkness in a year, obviously at the separate sides of the year. There's also the 10 degrees Celsius isotherm, which is this red dotted line that you can see. So this is the July 10 degrees Celsius isotherm, which means the average temperature in July is about 10 degrees Celsius. And then there's also the tree line, right? So this yellow is our tree line. So this is sort of where we stop seeing trees or forest, continuous forest. Also on this map, we have continuous and discontinuous permafrost, which is also a consideration. So lots of ways that we can think about the Arctic. There we go. But if we think about an Arctic marine ecosystem, kind of the base of that ecosystem is sea ice. So we like to say that sea ice is to the Arctic as soil is to a forest. It really is the basis of the ecosystem. So Obviously, in the Arctic, you're not going to see quite this density of wildlife, but this is a good summary where you can see everybody at once. But sea ice, algae, is actually the main primary producer in the Arctic. So this green you can see under the sea ice here, that sea ice algae grows on the underside of the sea ice because as sea ice freezes, the salt in the water is actually pushed out of the ice and back into the water. And that leaves little pockets and spaces in the underside of the ice, which is a perfect home for sea ice algae. So if you're ever up north and you see a chunk of ice that looks really dirty, it's likely just a piece of ice that's flipped over and you're seeing the algae on the bottom. But what's very interesting is for sea ice algae as a primary producer, most primary producers, think of like trees, right? They photosynthesize light from the sun to produce sugar. Sea ice algae photosynthesizes to primarily produce lipids or fats. So really from the bottom up, our Arctic runs on fat. The whole ecosystem, right? If you think about every animal that you're seeing on this picture here, they're all, well, they're all pretty fat if you think about it. They have a very thick blubber layer in technical terms, which is very important for keeping them warm. Okay, so that was a very quick summary of the Arctic. Of course, there's much more to learn. But we're going to move into polar bears. And this is a mom with, you can only see one cub, but she's got another cub hiding behind her over here. This was last fall in Churchill. So this map here says that there are 19 polar bear subpopulations. You can see them all outlined in purple. In reality, there are now 20 as of 2022. I don't have the outline for the newest subpopulation on this map, but it's South Greenland, so it's just right about here, if you can see my mouse. I'm not sure if you can, but just the southern tip of Greenland. It was discovered and delineated in 2022. So now we have 20 polar bear subpopulations, and you can see these are the southernmost ones over here, sort of in Hudson Bay and Davis Strait in Canada. And we'll make a special note of where this little point is on the map that says Churchill in Western Hudson Bay. Use this to orient you a little bit later in the talk. This is where we're going to be thinking about. Okay, polar bears in general are highly reliant on sea ice. They are technically a marine mammal, and their primary prey, or their favorite food, as I like to say, are ringed seals and bearded seals, although they do eat other kinds of seals. They eat beluga whales sometimes, walrus calves, anything that's got a lot of fat they tend to like. But we actually like to think of them not as carnivores, although they are technically hypercarnivores. We like to think of them as lipivores, right? If you think back to the word lipid, lipivore means that they really specialize on fat. And one of my favorite ways to think about how polar bears like to eat is if you think about, say, this ringed seal right here this polar bear has, think about it like an Oreo. Crazy, I know, but think the top cookie, the seal skin, the cream in the middle is the blubber layer or the fat, and then the underneath cookie is the muscle. So a polar bear is one of those people that would take off the top cookie, eat all the icing out, and leave the bottom cookie. They just like to eat the cream from the Oreo in an ideal world. And these cookies, the remainders of the seal that the polar bear doesn't eat, are often scavenged by Arctic fox. It's very common to see Arctic fox out on the ice eating the leftovers. So next time you eat an Oreo, I hope you think about polar bears and Arctic fox. So polar bears, you know, you saw this whole range that they live in. There's obviously a lot of variation in these different regions. But if we focus on this green region right here that I have circled, if you remember where Churchill is, you'll notice Churchill is also in this green region. Keep that in mind. But this green region is what we call seasonal sea ice. So that means it's covered in ice in the winter, and in the summer it's completely ice-free. So that means during the ice-free season, the bears have to migrate onto land. When they're on land, they're forced to fast, right? Polar bears hunt from the ice. No ice, no hunting, no seals. And when a polar bear is on land fasting, we've calculated they lose about 1 kilogram of fat per day. So even though they're not very active and they're kind of just hanging out, waiting for the ice to come back, just that basal metabolism loses about 1 kilogram of fat per day. There is a reduced metabolic rate when they're on land, but as many people don't know, polar bears, unlike other bears, do not hibernate, do not go through torpor, which is a version of hibernation, I guess. Yeah, when most bears are hibernating, polar bears are very active because that's in the winter when there's ice. So very common, especially around Churchill, to see bears on land in the summer hanging out in the grass. They often like to hang out near water bodies to stay cool. It can get pretty warm when bears are on land. I think it was like 24 degrees in Churchill the other day. So the bears like to stay by the water to cool off. So even though they spend a lot of time on land, polar bears are highly adapted to a life on ice. So if we look at their closest related ancestors, which is the grizzly bear, you can see a few physical differences here. The big one that I always like to point out is the length of the polar bear's neck and that sort of torpedo-shaped head, right? Compare that to the grizzly bear. And the big reason is, remember, a polar bear's favorite food, one of them is a ringed seal. Ringed seals use their front paws to create breathing holes in the ice. So a polar bear will stand over a breathing hole and wait until the seal comes up for air in between dives, right? They're mammals, they have to come up for air. And a polar bear's really long neck and nice streamlined head is the perfect shape to go in and grab that seal out of the breathing hole. Very specific on ice adaptation. Polar bears also have on the pads of their feet, maybe a little bit hard to see here, but that texture that you're seeing, those are called papillae. And those provide a lot of extra grip for polar bears. Another fun fact is that females also have pheromone glands in their feet. So when they are in estrus or ready to mate, they'll excrete pheromones from their feet and leave them in their tracks, and males will be able to track down the females by smelling their footprints. We also often see really fuzzy feet. So they have lots of fur, lots of insulation, especially on their feet to keep them very warm. Polar bears are very, very efficient at staying warm. So how do scientists like me study polar bears? Well, there are lots and lots of different ways. We'll just talk about a few, but one of the big ways is in Western Hudson Bay, so that's the population around Churchill, we have a long-term polar bear monitoring project. So we have been immobilizing bears. We chemically immobilize them from the helicopter, and then we collect data, we give them ID numbers. And we've been tracking this population for 55 years. So we see one bear sometimes multiple times in their life, and we have a very good understanding of polar bear ecology and the life cycle of these bears from this project. So here you can see we got a lot going on. This is my supervisor here. Kind of hard to see. He has these calipers that he's holding that he's measured the width of the polar bear skull. So he's measuring that. I'm back here probably taking a fur sample or a claw sample back there. So we take a lot of different samples when we have these bears immobilized. And then sometimes, okay, so another example. So this is me checking out this adult male's teeth. So we'll look at canine tooth wear because adult polar bears, they fight for access to females during the mating season. They're very competitive to impress females, basically. And when they fight, they'll hit teeth and their teeth will often break. So we like to record the amount of tooth breakage that we see on males. It's kind of hard to see, but this guy, his bottom canine is broken from fighting with another male. So I'm checking that out. And this is just me comparing my hand to a polar bear paw. Fun fact, when my hands get too cold in the field, I warm them up on polar bear paws because their paw pads are very, very, very warm. So it's great to thaw my fingers a little bit. but getting back to the science. On adult males and subadult bears or younger bears, that's between 2 and 5 years old, starting in 2016, we started deploying these little satellite ear tags. So this ear tag gives us the location of the bear for 6 to 9 months, depending on battery life, which is really helpful, and it was a really welcome progression in our science, because previously to the development of these ear tags, we were only collaring females with cubs. We still only collar females with cubs. Females, because a male polar bear's neck is actually thicker than its head. So if you try and collar a male polar bear, the collar just pops right off, which is not that helpful. Females are a little bit daintier, so they can wear a collar, no problem. And we only collar females with cubs because this collar down here is the battery. This battery, a whole lot bigger than this battery, right? This battery lasts for about 2 to 2.5 years, and cubs stay with mom for about 2 to 2.5 years. So if mom has a collar, we can keep tabs on her and her cubs for that whole period. We can also find her in subsequent years to see if she still has cubs, so we can check on cub survival as well. So it's very useful to have these collared females. So that is a very quick summary of some of the ways that we work on polar bears. Of course, there are a lot of different methods. Coming up, I'll talk to you a little bit more about some of the other methods that I've been using. But first, I'm here talking to you thanks to Polar Bears International. Polar Bears International is the only nonprofit in the world that focuses solely on polar bear conservation, so they're very unique in that way. They have a big presence in Churchill, hence why I'm here, but also internationally across the circumpolar Arctic, as we say, or across the whole Arctic. So it's a team of very, very passionate people. We have scientists like me, conservationists, lots of support staff, lots of volunteers doing a lot of different work. Specifically for polar bears, and of course for polar bears, that means for drawing attention to climate change. But Polar Bears International supports a lot of different research. That's a big thing. So again, this is one of these immobilized polar bears. I'm back here probably taking a fat biopsy. We take those as well, but Polar Bears International helped fund this project as well. So they participate in and helped fund maternity den studies for female bears, population dynamics, which is really important for management in Canada. Lots of tech innovation. Human-bear coexistence is very important to Polar Bears International. And also there's been more and more involvement in genetic studies. A little bit later, we're going to focus on this human-bear coexistence component when I talk to you about my tourism research. But first, the effects of climate change on polar bears. This is a miraculous photo, real photo, not AI. This photographer has won many awards for it. Her name is down here if you're interested in looking at her work. She's very talented. But let's think about the life cycle of a polar bear and maybe what climate change could mean for that. So here's my little timeline. This is a year, right? January to December. And if we think about Hudson Bay specifically, so now we're really zeroing in on those Western Hudson Bay polar bears, the polar bears that live in Hudson Bay on the sea ice. And in the 80s, 79 to 89, if we look, this picture means that there is sea ice in Hudson Bay all the way from January to about late June or early July. It was pretty common. The ice would melt around here. That means bears would come on land. So this whole period here, bears are on land. Then in mid-November-ish, that is when it starts to get cold again in Hudson Bay, and the ice would freeze again. And that means the bears can go out onto the ice again and start hunting seals. So it's this period here of land, which is when the bears are fasting. Okay? Now, fast forward 2005 to 2015, you can see that the ice is melting earlier now, early June, and it's taking longer to freeze up as well. So not until late November. And of course, this is only progressing. Last year, the ice froze up in mid-December. So this period here on land is getting longer and longer. And if you remember, why is that important? Well, bears lose 1 kilogram of fat per day on land. So more time on land, more fat lost, but also less time on the ice, which means less time that they can hunt seals to put on that fat. So it's really coming at them from both sides. So if we think about all the ways that this can impact polar bears. Well, more time on land, like I said, longer fasting, shorter hunting. But also, more time on land gives them more time to have human-bear interactions, which usually are not super welcome. People in the north are not really keen on interacting with polar bears. Understandably, I'm sure. Uh, and then, of course, when bears are on land longer and they're hungrier, they start to become more quote unquote problem bears. They're getting into garbage dumps. They become more habituated to human food sources, and it just sort of snowballs. If we look at this figure on the right, just quickly, there's a lot going on, but I'll sum it up for you. So this is the predicted proportion of a population starved. Depending on the time of the number of days rather that a bear is on land. So you can see these are adult males in blue and subadults or younger bears in red. So you can see it takes fewer days for more subadults to starve, which makes sense. So our subadults, you know, they're kind of freshly free from mom. They're still learning how to bear. They're not amazing hunters yet, so they don't get as much food, and they're also just smaller in general. So of course they're more susceptible to starvation, whereas adult males, they are much, much bigger, better hunters. They can usually, we expect, last a little bit longer. We're also seeing reductions in body condition. So this is especially important for female polar bears because reduced body condition or less fat means less reproductive success. Polar bears are what we call or have what we call delayed implantation. So even after they mate, they'll hold on to that fertilized egg until later in the year to make sure that they're fat enough to implant that egg into their uterus and start their pregnancy. So if they're not fat enough, that egg will not get implanted and the pregnancy will fail for that year. But we're also seeing overall smaller litter sizes. You can see this mom here has 3 cubs, and over time we've definitely seen a shift to only 2 cubs. Lower cub survival, so and the rare chance that we do see a mom with triplets, in the spring, right at den emergence, the following year, that same mom will almost always only have 2 cubs. So cubs surviving to adulthood is lower. And also just more exposure to humans and warmer weather has increased the parasite and pathogen load for these bears as well. Also, the Arctic is developing very quickly, right? Less sea ice means lots of people have a lot more access. So there's been increased shipping because of less sea ice, which leads to more oil and gas exploration. And of course, lots of interest in the Arctic, so unregulated ecotourism is also a concern, which we'll talk about right now. So those are some of the effects of climate change. I know it sounds a little doom and gloom, but rest assured, the polar bears aren't just all dying. Please don't take that away from this talk. There are some populations that are doing really well, some that are adapting to new food sources. The Davis Strait polar bear subpopulation just off the coast of Newfoundland has done really well. They eat a lot of harp seals now because the harp seal harvest in Newfoundland has been more closely regulated, so there's more harp seals. So those bears are doing great. Some of our bears in the high Arctic are doing really good as well. So it's all about sort of understanding what's happening globally, but also at these different regional levels. But speaking of what's happening at regional levels and this anthropogenic disturbance I talk about, let's talk about polar bear tourism research. So this is the tundra about 45 kilometers east of the town of Churchill. This is a tundra buggy lodge. So this stays out here for the polar bear tourism season, and people sleep out here, watch bears all the time. Evidently, we see mums and cubs out here all the time. So tourism in the Arctic in general, with the progression of climate change, there has been this increase in what a lot of people are calling last chance tourism, as people are sort of rushing to see these environments and wildlife that are being threatened. And polar bears, of course, are a huge focus here because they've really become this flagship species for climate change. Focusing in on these Western Hudson Bay polar bears again, remember I told you we come back. Right, this is a Western Hudson Bay, and there's Churchill and that little point there. And like you already know, because you're polar bear experts by now, Hudson Bay is ice-free in the summer, so our bears come onto land. But what's very interesting about the Churchill region is the ice in Hudson Bay freezes first, right near the Churchill River. That's right near the town of Churchill, because the huge amount of freshwater inflow from that river increases the freezing point, right? Because salty water freezes at a lower temperature than fresh water. So all that fresh water makes it freeze more easily over by the river. So you can see here, this was December 2024. All this white here is the first spits of sea ice in that year, and they're right around Churchill. Polar bears know this. So as it starts to get cold around October and November, the polar bears that sort of spread out all along this Western Hudson Bay coastline will all start to gather right around the town of Churchill because they know the ice is going to come from there first. So this gathering of polar bears, like you can see here, this is just a couple kilometers east of the town of Churchill. These are a bunch of adult males. This seasonal movement of this very high density of polar bears in the fall, while the bears wait for the ice, has created more viewing opportunities for polar bears than anywhere else in the world. You just don't see polar bears in high densities like this anywhere else in the world, which has resulted in a large polar bear tourism industry and made Churchill known as the polar bear capital of the world. So, one second. So, all this to say, great. Polar bear tourism is so great and fun. We love it. Polar bears are cool. Why do I want to study tourism? Well, we want to understand what exactly this coexistence between tourism and polar bears means. These results are going to be really helpful for polar bear conservation and maintaining responsible, sustainable tourism. We want our tourism to be well regulated, both for the people and the bears. And tourism guidelines in Manitoba have recently begun to be reassessed, but this is causing a problem in the community because the most recent research about these bears and the tourism that affects them is from more than 20 years ago. So I saw this hole and I was just like, this is a job that I can do. We can make this happen. So what's the project? What am I doing? Well, I am tracking all the tours that are happening around the Churchill region and getting collaborators to log their polar bear sightings. So I'm working with tourism operators, guides, guests, and locals. So this is a very community and citizen-based data collection project. So citizen involvement, well, why that? Why am I not just doing this science on my own? Well, first off, that's a lot of bears and a lot of tours. And I'm only one person. And when I was thinking about this problem, I thought tourists and guides have countless interactions with polar bears every single year, right? There's hundreds of bears and thousands of people seeing these bears. So I was really hoping to harness that data. So I created an app using the interface Cyber Tracker, which I have launched to the town, the tourism operators, the guides, that anyone can use to track their tours and record all their polar bear sightings. So last year was our very first season, or our pilot season, and It went pretty well, if you ask me. From October 1st to November 20th, everyone that collaborated was able to log a total of 435 polar bear sightings. So you can see October 1st to November, well, 20th on the bottom here, the number of sightings. So this is the variation in sightings based on sex and age. You'll see the low amount of subadults. That is largely because it's much harder for people to identify subadults. So this unknown category sort of houses like that uncertainty with subadult or female or adult male. But what I thought was interesting was over time, everyone increased, which you expect, right? As it gets colder, bears are like, oh, that sea ice is coming. We better get close to town. So the number of bears increases. But what's very interesting is the number of males increased and then decreased. So we're really interested in looking into what that might mean. This is our map, our tourism map. So I'll orient you a little bit quickly. This is the town of Churchill right here. And all these navy blue dots, or the lines, are all of the tours that we were able to log last year. And all the red dots were all the polar bears that were sighted. And then this sort of dark blue hazy bit, this represents regions where there are lots and lots of tourism tracks overlapping, or tours that spend a lot of time there. So this spot right here where we see lots of bears and lots of tour tracks, this is what we call buggy land. So this is where those tundra buggies will come and drive around all day, and people will just be viewing bears 8 hours a day, every single day out here. So it does make sense that we're seeing a lot of bear action here. But really, people are seeing polar bears all the way from in town, all the way to buggy land. We're also getting people to log the behavioral responses of bears to their presence. And some interesting, preliminary results that I found was that adult males were the only group that were likely to change their behavior when a tourism vehicle was present or when a tourism vehicle approached, which is interesting. The females and the younger bears seemed quite unbothered. The viewing distance, so we had people record the distance from which they are seeing the bear, and the viewing distance had no effect on if a bear was changed their behavior, if they got up, walked away, ran, did whatever, how far away they were, it didn't matter, which was also unexpected. But what's really interesting to me, and we're, still talking about this one, is that bears were less likely to change their behavior as the day progressed. So if we look at, this is a day, tours usually start at 8 a.m., and this is through the whole day. Of our sightings that were in the morning, it was more common for bears to change their behavior. So this is a probability of a behavior change. And what does that mean? A bear that was lying down stands up. A bear that's walking starts running. A bear that's sitting starts walking, something like that. And as the day progressed, bears are less likely to do this. Maybe they're just getting used to having the buggies around every single day. Or maybe in the morning, they just slept all night and they're keen to get up and walk around anyway. We're still sort of trying to understand that. But this is some of this stuff that we're doing, and we're hoping to continue this project for a couple of years to get even more information. And it's been a real joy working with the community so closely and getting so many really valuable perspectives on these bears. So moving forward, more data collection, right? I'm working with the community as much as I can, and we've had some interest to other regions, both internationally and further north in Canada where polar bear viewing is present. So I'm really looking forward to the future of this project. And then I will also be analyzing these spatial interactions between tourism vehicles and polar bears and understanding sort of the spatial and temporal interactions and these impacts on polar bear behavior to try and help inform the future regulatory changes that are happening in the tourism industry. So with that, thank you for listening to me talk for ages. A big thank you specifically for the tourism research. It would not be possible without support from all the folks in Churchill. And of course, big thank you to Polar Bears International, who's ensured the success of so much work that I've done throughout my career. If you guys are interested in following along with some of the work that I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram there, Polar Brooke. There's no space. I don't know why there's a space there. It's just Polar Brooke with no space. Happy to also answer any questions you want to email me, or right now I'm happy to answer questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Brooke. Does anyone in person have any questions that they wanted to ask?
Yeah. I wonder what the specific time that there's more tourists up there, and is it allowed all year?
Did you catch that one?
Yeah. So, tourism in general in Churchill is mostly there is 3 tourism seasons. Winter, kind of February, March is Aurora. Right now, July and August is beluga season, and then bear season is really October and November. So if you're keen to see bears specifically, October and November is your best bet. You can come to Churchill whenever you want, but say if you come up in May, April or May, you're probably going to have a pretty boring time. It's magnificent and wonderful, but not that much to see. I will say if you really want to see whales and bears, August, you'll usually see a few bears on land and lots of beluga whales. So it just depends what your priorities are.
Next question.
So you mentioned ear tags and the like collars. Like when they die, they just like leave them on the bears, or like what if bear tries to take one off?
Amazing question. Yeah. So the ear tags are designed to fall off after a maximum a year. So the way that the posts are made, the posts will break in less than a year and it will fall off. And sometimes we'll find, so we put on the ear tags in the spring. And then we also do field work in the fall. So if we find a bear in the fall that has an ear tag, we'll just take it off for them. The collars have a release mechanism that's programmed for the collar to drop off around 2 years, but we make sure it's programmed to make the collar fall off when the bears are on land, because then we can triangulate the location of the collar, recover it, and reuse it, because they're very expensive. But no bear will have any device on it for longer than 2 years.
Any other questions from the group? No? All right. No more questions in person. Thank you so much, Brooke, for spending this time with us. We really appreciate all the work that you do and our partnership with Polar Bears International, and hope that you have a good rest of your Arctic Sea Ice Day.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys.